And as incredible as it sounds, although I'm not really interested in that anymore, I'm looking for my own truths with it, was that this small being, roughly about 3 foot tall, clad all in black, with what I thought was a motorcycle helmet on its head. At that point, I really didn't understand what the thing was. It walked through the glass and disappeared into the downstairs bedroom and study. And then it shot through the hall, this thing, and up the stairs and disappeared. And I said, there's an intruder in the house. My mind was blank. My brother had come out of a small trance. And then I said again, there's an intruder in the house. And I took a knife from the back drawer, and then we searched the house. There was nothing. And it was that night that I, woke up and found myself floating about 3 foot off the floor. And I was suspended. So I can't move.
Philip Kinsella is a widely acclaimed clairvoyant medium. He is the author of Reaching for the Divine, Sky Crash Throughout Time, and Believe, a groundbreaking theory which bridges the gap between the psychic and UFO phenomena. Tonight we'll talk about his abduction and more, coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Philip Kinsella is in the studio tonight, the author of numerous books, most notably Reaching for the Divine, Believe, Bridging the Gap Between the Psychic and UFO Phenomena, and Sky Crash Throughout Time. Mr. Kinsella is joining us from Bedfordshire, England. Sir, thank you for joining us, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Cameron. I really appreciate being on your show. It's an honor to be on here. Thank you very much.
Sir, you're a widely acclaimed clairvoyant medium, and you're also a UFO investigator. How long have you been investigating the UFO phenomenon?
I've been investigating the UFO phenomenon since I was a teenager, really. And that was all due to the fact that my twin brother and I have a twin. He's an author and an artist himself, Ronald. And we had an experience with our grandmother with a UFO, as people would call it. And then I was led into the investigations to find out what we're dealing with on an empathic and very honest level. I never anticipated, however, that much later in my life that I would become what people call a clairvoyant medium. So I was kind of like stuck between these two worlds of disbelief and total rejection for most of society at the time. But my quest has always been to find the truth and to work upon a hypothetical model of what this all means, because that's the only thing that we can base our assumptions upon, is theories. So pretty much from experience, this is what led me into the field. And only just recently, I say recently, on the 9th of April in 2016, at precisely 11:15 p.m., we were witness to 3 UFOs that had been filmed and analyzed, and it's just one of those things, I think, that happens to certain people. It doesn't make us special in any way. We're all special and unique in my eyes, but it's certainly a puzzle.
Ironically, just 2 days ago, I saw a Facebook page, and there was somebody from the UK, and they're asking why there were so few accounts of UFOs and alien experiencers in the UK, and that's not true, is it? I mean, there are lots of folks in the UK that have experienced UFOs and have been abducted as well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, statistically, I mean, you have the most well-known famous cases, which I fully respect. But indeed, you're correct. There are a lot of cases that do go under the radar that are not reported. But I must stress here, a lot of people, make out that because you've seen UFOs and that you're trying to justify what you've seen, you then become entangled in this very difficult world of rejection and acceptance, and we have to be very careful within the balance of the two. So my argument is that being a so-called clairvoyant medium and a UFO experiencer does you little credit. But when you've had something happen to you on a very unique and personal level that the system that we serve tells you is not real, then you're adamant to find that truth. It seems to be a part of what you are on a soul level. And I do believe that a lot of folks out there in the world, those who believe and those who don't believe, we have to respect both aspects, but we have to be very careful through our analysis of what we're dealing with. And with regards to the UFO subject, I mean, we're told the story that we're dealing with aliens from another planet. I'm not disputing that. But as we progress further within our studies and our evaluations, it does appear that we may also be dealing with some type of interdimensional hypothesis as opposed to traversing space and time physically. So, we have to look outside the box in order to understand the bigger picture, because we haven't really come very far since the late 1940s when the famous Roswell, New Mexico UFO crashed. We're still going round in circles. We're not really, fixing the problem, because we're still stuck in this constant merry-go-round of belief and disbelief, if you will.
And I do know that there's stigmas attached to that, and every single country in the world has some sort of different stigma attached in how UFO and alien reports are received. So in Great Britain, I know that I don't know, but I would imagine there's thousands of people that have these stories and they haven't come out yet. So I do believe in the future, when this is more widely accepted, even without disclosure, there should be more people coming out and sharing those experiences. Don't you agree?
I do agree. The only thing is we have to, because my twin brother and I, who is also an experiencer himself, we're linked with a group of fantastic people, researchers, and I'm very honored to be linked with them. And we actually look to see what is real and what is not real. You can, find the fakes and frauds and hoaxes from the original one. So our modus operandi has always been to search for that truth. However, in England itself, there is a lot more of a backlash with regards to reported sightings, because we're still in medieval times here with regards to an acceptance of the subject. So it's really hard. And the other thing that I find fascinating is that whatever evidence you bring to the table, whether it be on film footage that's been analyzed, it appears to me that most people aren't interested in that. They're more interested in the mythology or the underlining, causation factor, or this happened, but there's nothing to substantiate those claims. But when you do bring the claims to the table, it's strangely and very oddly missed. It's overlooked. And I think that's a bit like God. If we talk of God, there are millions of people on this planet who believe in a God, but they can't touch it, they can't feel it, they can't see it. And that's all very comfortable within their form of psychology. But if God was to come down, let's just hypothetically assume here, in a craft or however he comes down, I have joked that he'd be killed before he stepped foot on the floor, because people wouldn't want to acknowledge that. It is a very, very bizarre situation that we find ourselves in within the subject matter of not only ufology, but also spiritual matters, if I may use that word loosely.
So at what age did you see your first UFO, and what age did you realize that you were a clairvoyant medium?
We were 13. My twin and I were 13 when we saw the UFO with our grandmother. That had been in Middlesex, a little bit outside London. They lived in a 3-story high house, and we used to spend our vacation periods there. And my twin brother and I had been in the garden with our grandmother one beautiful summer's afternoon, and a silver orb, as I would call it, came across the sky. We thought at first it was a balloon, but as it neared, it came towards where we were, and it hung over our grandmother's head. This has been reported quite a number of times. It was the size of a football, and it was silver, had no seams, no markings on it. It just hung there suspended, and we assumed that it was some form of eye. The idea of it being a spaceship from another planet didn't seem to entertain our heads at that time, although I did hear about, such reports here and there because it wasn't as widely broadcast in those days. But, it was the most amazing experience, and it hung there. And when we asked our grandmother what this thing was, because our grandmother had been psychic, she said the fairies had come to take a closer look at us. Well, we laughed because we understood that what our grandmother was saying was only to cushion the blow of what it could possibly be. So, and then it seemed to drift off towards the house, look through the windows, and then disappeared. And you try to explain to someone what you've experienced, and they will just sit back and think that you're making this all up. And that's all well and good. But when you've had that experience, then you understand on a deeper level that the system that we're all in is telling you, no, they don't exist. There can be a rational explanation for it. And we're finding now today on a much larger scale that that is something that is becoming a problem, and something I think the system is finding hard to suppress. In terms of the psychic part, that didn't develop until my late 20s. And that had all been due to me going to see a medium when my grandmother had passed. And she used to work for the FBI in America, so she'd work on cold soul cases. And she read for me, and it was the first time I'd ever had a reading from a psychic medium, because even though I believed my grandmother, I always thought that psychic mediums were frauds. And little did I realize just how powerful the media machine is to, denounce such people. And from then onwards, some very strange and bizarre things started to happen to me. And I became what is known as the psychic medium. But I have to tell you, which is rather humorous, I thought, oh Lord, here we are. There's the guy that studies UFOs, and now he talks to the dead. I thought my reputation would go from the top right down the bottom. But it was a personal journey. It was a personal voyage for me to discover the truth, not fallacy, not fantasy, the truth of what we represent, and the truth also of whether or not we're really alone in this vast cosmos.
Do you think having a reading opens you up somehow to have your own abilities and experiences?
Well, when a reading is being conducted, there are several factors that need to be taken into consideration, one of which is honesty and truth. The medium, as I work, only asks for yes or no, and she looked slightly away from me. And I discovered that consciousness seems to operate on a higher level of our current awareness. And what she was doing was that she was actually receiving signals that operate on a higher frequency. And the best way to describe that, Cameron, is if you have a TV set or a mobile phone or radio, and it is a physical device that's been created to receive signals on a higher level of vibration. So when people say to me, and I'm sorry I've got to jump slightly here forward about life after death, well, do you have a body? Well, if you think about a signal or a show within that signal, it doesn't have a body, but the device that's been created can actually, infiltrate that signal with no problem through to its physical body and, allow the person to hear, see, or whatever through the instrument. So my understanding is that on a conscious level, we appear to be far more than just flesh and blood creatures with a sell-by date.
So do you believe psychic abilities, being a clairvoyant, being a medium, is that of the physical nature? I mean, is this a tangible thing that we can feel and touch? I think people in the past had experienced ghosts and spirits and things like that, and believe that these things can walk through walls and do almost anything. But however, I know that people are acknowledging the fact that it is possible for this to be in the physical realm, something that a molecular state that we can touch or feel, rather than just something that's spiritual. Does that make sense?
Yeah, my understanding is that until our consciousness is matched with that level of vibration, that's the only time that we'll be able to physically integrate with it. A lot of the very good clairvoyant psychic mediums that I've met, and I always say that if there's a bad medium in town, people will get to know about it. So a lot of the ones that I've met stress the same thing. I mean, I have seen people who have passed over on 2 occasions that have built up physically. Was I able to touch them? No. I wasn't near enough to do that. And there was no form of mental communication either. It was almost as if it was a sign to tell me that they were okay, that they passed on. And this is nothing new. I mean, a lot of patients who are dying and have crossed over to the other side, just before their transition, they report seeing loved ones in the room with them. So again, it's hearsay from the individual. But I don't think that all of the people reporting these experiences can be lying. The same with the UFO phenomena. And my entanglement with those 2 subjects is still very much evident today through a lot of the research I'm doing, because I believe that there is a connection, that there has to be a link. If we naturally evolved by an accident, and we are born and then we die, and there is nothing after our physical existence, then what point is there in us, aspiring with all that we have within our lives as a sentient human being? And, through my experiences, states categorically that there is an afterlife, and whatever we taint that within this life, whether it be religion or science, at the end of the day, the individual's beliefs and, what they hold dear in their heart is important to them. So I would never convince someone and say to them that this is where you go if they believe that it's something different. That's very dangerous. So I think the experiences are on a personal level, a very personal level. And the same could be said for the UFO phenomena. I absolutely believe in that.
Do you think 50 years in the future, it'll be possible to interact with UFOs, aliens, and spirits as often as we interact with humans now? Are we going to get a bigger and better insight and figure out a way to do that so it's part of our normal everyday life?
That's a very good question. I love that question. That's a really smart question. The evidence suggests at the moment that the UFO phenomena operates almost as willingly as the psychic realm. I mean, you have these reports that UFOs are able to interact with the individual on a one-to-one level and then disappear as though it was a ghost. We have these reports of the UFOs appearing as lights. And, in some reports as well of the abductee being able to see dead loved ones on board the craft. Does that mean that they've gone to heaven? No, I believe that certain entities are able to connect with your mind and pull what they need from your mind and make you believe that what you're seeing is what's happening. So the UFO phenomena is a very multi-complex, program. I call it program because this is exactly what it is. There has to be a program behind it. There has to be some form of development behind it, with regards to the dead, talking to the dead. Yes, I've had a few experiences in groups where we've spoken to guys who have crossed over. Some of those guys have been in Afghanistan war, and to them it was as if they just crossed, walked through a door, and crossed over very easily. But in terms of the physical connection, I'm not so sure about that. I think that with science is discovering that, everything oscillates on certain vibration levels. Perhaps, possibly in the future, that may be the way forward. But at the moment, I can't see a way of doing that at the moment. Communication, talking, yes, I believe so. But actually, physical interaction, I'm not so sure.
I want to talk a little bit more about UFOs, and then we'll get back to the spiritual world in a moment. But I was wondering if there's an investigative body in England that you have ever dealt with that would be on the same level, like with MUFON in the United States.
No, not really. I'm the only people that I'm connected with is surprisingly MUFON from your good souls from the US of A. We didn't really have a body of investigations. I did belong to a group that was called Beams, which was known as the British Earth and Aerial Mystery Society, and I belonged to that for some years, and we had some wonderful guests coming to do talks. But they all seem to be quite fragmented. But there are a lot of centers around here where they have conferences like Your Good Souls over there. But there is no real main body like MUFON or anything like that we have here really that we can connect with. I mean, we have the Ministry of Defense, but when you write to them, they write back and say UFOs are no defense significance. They don't deal with UFO reports anymore. Yeah. And so it's like going around in circles. So unfortunately, the investigator, the investigators of the world, the researchers are the people who are fighting for, the disclosure, as you call it, and bringing this evidence to the table. But I feel that it may not go down too well. I mean, we have the likes of Georgina Bruni, who, bless her heart, has now passed over. I did meet her many years ago on a TV program, and Nick Pope, former Ministry of Defence here. And Georgina Bruni had met with Baroness Thatcher, who was our Prime Minister many years ago. And Georgina Bruni had asked Baroness Thatcher, of course, Georgina Bruni was the book of You Can't Tell the People. And she asked Baroness Thatcher about UFOs, and Baroness Thatcher said, UFOs. First, you have to get your facts right. And when you do get your facts right, that's when you'll find why we can't tell the people. Now, that that doesn't say a good deal about what we're dealing with on an empathic level. But I do believe that there are two parts to this. Like with humans, we have the good, the bad, and also the ugly. So we have to try and work our way around that on some level.
How many personal UFO experiences have you had?
There have been quite a few. I don't claim that, I see aliens every week or every day. I don't claim to be abducted. The only abduction that I remember clearly was the one that happened in the winter of 1989. UFOs, as for UFOs, there's been quite a number. Probably about, throughout my life, maybe about 16 or 17. But two of them really stick in my mind as, actual really amazing wow factors. And although, one of them can be proved, which was the filming of the object on the 9th of April 2016, the others sadly were not. I didn't have a camera ready to use or anything like that. On another occasion, we had done an experiment at Rendlesham Forest many years ago to prove something that I was working on, and it actually worked, but we didn't take any film footage with us there. And people say, because you've got no film footage. But when you do take film footage, they're still not interested. As I said before, we're going around in circles. It's like you bring the proof to the table. It's buried. It's like they don't want to know. It's like they want something more. They want the information for themselves. But we're in a situation where we're wishing to share that information.
I think even now it's so easy to reproduce, or not reproduce, but produce a film that shows aliens or UFOs, that people are even more skeptical when they actually see the actual footage, and they try to debunk it immediately rather than look at it for what it is. So I do understand that. Tell me about your abduction experience that you had.
Well, that happened in the winter of 1989. I'd literally come back from work, and at that time I didn't drive. And I used to get the train back to a small village called Marston Mortain, and we lived in a cul-de-sac. And when I'd gone home, my brother and my sister, it's quite a big house, were in the kitchen with our dog. And yes, I've been ripped about having a dog there as well. And when I came in through the door, which was all frosted glass, and through to the hall, I went into the kitchen. And, you just have your small talk and that type of thing. And my brother was standing away from the door that was open that looked out to the hall, and I was standing directly in front of it with the dog. My sister was to my left. And all of a sudden, there was this change in the atmosphere. It was almost like electric, static. And my brother went into a kind of like a strange trance. The only time I remembered seeing that was on a film called Dark Skies, the film, not the television series. He looked up to the ceiling and said, there's going to be an earthquake or grandma's going to die. Well, our grandmother hadn't passed at that point, and I wondered what the hell he was talking about. And the dog started to growl, and all along this strange, electrical feeling was building. And when I looked at the front of the hall where the glass doors were, there was a light there, and I thought that perhaps a car had come up the driveway. But there was no car, and the light got brighter and brighter. And as incredible as it sounds, although I'm not really interested in that anymore, I'm looking for my own truths, was that this small being, roughly about 3 foot tall, clad all in black, with what I thought was a motorcycle helmet on its head. At that point, I really didn't understand what the thing was. It walked through the glass and disappeared into the downstairs bedroom and study, which my brother and I both shared. It was quite a big room with a shower next to it. And then it shot through the hall, this thing, and up the stairs and disappeared. And I said, there's an intruder in the house. My mind was blank. My brother had come out of a small trance. And then I said again, there's an intruder in the house. And I took a knife from the back drawer, and then we searched the house. There was nothing. And it was that night that I, woke up and found myself floating about 3 foot off the floor. And I was suspended. So I can't move, laying on my back. And it was dark. So I don't know what time in the morning it was. And I was being pulled through the doors. This all had the elements of doors, going through solid objects. And I thought, oh, this is weird. I'm conscious and I can't move. And I'm being pulled out towards the kitchen, the conservatory, and then the back garden. And then as I'm being pulled around and looking up, there are loads of UFOs. And I thought at that point, within this state, oh my God, they're true. All the reports that have been stated about them are true. And I remember looking up and seeing one that was stationary while all the others were moving. And as soon as I fixed my attention upon this object, I was pulled up to it very quickly, and then I blacked out. And the next part's very disturbing, which is where I woke to find myself in a darkish room, and I'd been strapped to a bed, and it was very hot and uncomfortable. And I looked to my right, and this is where it gets really crazy. There were 3 reptilian-type creatures who were moving backwards and forwards in a strange stance. And I was horrified. I was really, words fail. And at this point, they had that something had been performed on me. I'm not going to go into detail, please, because it's not very nice. But when I was screaming and yelling, this small grey thing came forward. It was more cream and seemed to retract the devices and the certain object or implement, and told me to stand and to walk with it towards the door. And I thought they were going to shove me out. And I was ordered to dress. And the next thing I knew, I was coming down to the ground in daylight, and there was another creature, more humanized, waiting for me on the ground. So these buggers had cleared off. And there was this being that was standing there that was like a grey, but more humanized, with a pronounced chin, that had his arms folded in the one-piece uniform, and a stupid pointed hat on his head. And his hat was underneath a UFO. And he was looking at me real angry, like I'd really done something wrong, and I couldn't work out what it was. And I thought, you know what? I'm not having this. This is ridiculous. I want to know what this is all about. And I fought to think, how am I able to go through locked and bolted doors? And I thought, if he could give me the answer to that, I'll be able to reveal them. And he looked surprised and started to talk, and only an electronic rasp came through his mouth, and I was pulled back through the conservatory, the kitchen, the hall, and then into my room, and I woke. Now, when I woke, I had a nosebleed, and the next day I had 3 marks on the back of my right ear, and I have 3 marks on my right arm. I couldn't walk properly for some time, and I had constant nosebleeds to the right nostril. Now, what's interesting is all these years later, I've had problems with my right ear. The marks we tried to take behind my right ear on a Polaroid camera. You remember those cameras where you used to take an instant camera? It was developed.
Love the Polaroid camera.
Yeah. Well, no matter how many times my brother tried to film the back of my ear to take the picture wouldn't come out. That is the God's honest truth. So there was no one in those days really to talk to. I think we spoke briefly to the British ufologist Jenny Randall, who contacted us, who seemed quite interested, but this certainly to her wasn't anything new. But with regards to my right ear, I had that checked, and there does seem to be something that's in the canal, but they're not sure what it is. People say, oh, you should go and get it operated on. No, I don't. I don't want it touched. I want it left. So the argument is, did this help my psychic abilities? Is this some type of tracking device? I claim nothing. I don't know. But that experience to me, because it happened in an ethereal state, people were talking, I found out, about abductions as though they were quite physical. I wasn't so sure. So I wanted to find out more about what these things were that were called greys, where they come from, why they're here. And, the romanticized physical abductions was something that I, to a degree, not with all of them, but some of them, could discount, because I found that we were dealing something that operated on a much deeper, a more complex level, than the cases that we've been told about. I'm not talking about the cases of the 1950s or 60s. They had to be physical because there were less people on the planet. But now it appeared to me that the process of an abduction, as they call it, had to operate on a much more complex and silent level. So that's where my research led me more away from what happened to me. I've kind of like, I can still see it as though it happened yesterday. And I'm sorry, Cameron, that I've raced through it very quickly, but there was a lot of finer details that would take too long to discuss on a radio program. But the experience hasn't left me since it happened back in 1989. And the being that I saw, the last one, I had the feeling I'd seen him before, but couldn't remember where. I mean, this has been recounted on TV and radio, and I drew a picture of the guy. I call it Guy, but if I'm not going to hit him if I see him again, I promise.
I actually call them guys too. So if you listen to any of my past podcasts, I always say, well, there was this guy, and
that's fantastic.
They're far from guys, but I think your story has many common denominators with my own. I think it has many common denominators with so many other people. And of course, when it's over and when you have a chance to think about it later in life, you often come up with more questions than you do have answers. But I can tell you that in between maybe 1970 and 1990, there were people who are now about 50 years old, who there was a lot of experiences and a lot of abductions. And I hear from people all the time. And one of the questions that I'll ask them, and especially through Facebook, and I get messages, and I'll say, are you about at the age of about 50 to 55 years old right now? And I hear from a lot of those people. So I think that at that time, it was very, very prevalent. Had you heard of any of the other abductions of people that you knew back in that time period?
No, none at all. In fact, there was no one to communicate with other than when I wrote to Jenny Randall to tell her about the experience. There was no one in those days. So we're talking about 1989, and I'm not talking about the Dark Ages here, but
right.
You could still get UFO books, but they weren't as prevalent as they are today. I mean, mass markets, and you can, write your own books, which is amazing, and I think are absolutely brilliant and brings a lot of thoughts and feelings and theories to the table. But in those days, no. And I kind of like, it was the whole idea was, horrific, and yet to some extent, I feel like I've grown from that experience. I seem or feel like I've been taken outside of the normal functioning of life. And was it meant to help? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. But in some ways, although it was horrific, I've learned a lot. I've survived the journey, and I could tell you that I don't feel that they wanted to hurt me, but understand me that they couldn't. As a human, I don't feel that they had the empathy that we have. And this is what led me further into researching the greys and also the hypothetical model of what they may represent. I'm not stating that, and it's with all of them, because we have different factions of them as we do with humans. And Kathleen Marden, the wonderful Kathleen Marden, who is a lovely person, she made me laugh on a radio interview when she said the rogue greys. And I kind of like had this idea of like some really badass greys out there, kicking out.
They are for sure, yes.
Yeah, you've got to have a sense of humor with this. I mean, you've got to have a line where you can draw and say, okay, so it's really interesting. But yeah, I'm literally today still fascinated with it. I'm still researching, and as I said, we don't have any answers, but we can certainly theorize.
Do you have any idea why you were abducted and what the objective was?
No. And that is something that still puzzles me. And that's the other aspect of what we represent on a spiritual level. I'm not one of these people that goes around, professing this, that, and the other. My work is more, I'm not a scientist, but more scientific, if I may use that very gently. And I think it has something to do with us as, eternal beings. And it's something that the Greys themselves seem very interested in. I mean, there's been a hypothesis they could be robots. There's the hypothesis they could be us from the future. But I feel that there's something a little bit more involved with this. I mean, certainly the two Greys, I mean, there were three reptilians, the one on the craft and the one on the ground. to my opinion, they seem very old. So we could be dealing with something that operates on a very different level of understanding that we ourselves can relate to. The human beings haven't been around for a very long time with regards to the age of the universe and so on and so forth. So, could they be guardians of ours? I don't know. Are they our creators? I'm absolutely convinced that we have been genetically modified through the hominid. So Darwin wasn't all that wrong in terms of us deriving from apes, in my estimation. I think that there was some type of genetic gene splicing experimentation going on. And I do joke with people, Cameron, I say here that, if we had been created as slaves by the aliens then, well, nothing much has changed today.
Absolutely not. So who are these aliens and where are they from?
Well, that is something we're still looking for. But one of the interesting aspects of the abduction phenomena is how it's done. And if we think about it, more times than not all times, but some people are taken through walls and doors. And my work or thesis was very much, enhanced in 1996 when I had what people would term as a download. And I used to poo-poo it. And I understand for people that don't get it, that unless you've had the experience, it's very different. But I was at work one day and I had this flash, the only way I can explain it, it's like a download. And it was telling me that what the Greys were, or a certain faction of them. And I believe that, I wanted to look into why the Greys were interested in us and also in reproduction and, why they were. And I met with Dr. David Jacobs in America, and he believes that they're here integrating among us. I don't discount that. But there was something more about the abduction and also about hybridization. And why would the Greys want to create a new genus through us? And if you think about it, the Greys can't, as we understand, reproduce. They're sexless. It's almost as if they're a blank canvas, that they are trying to use us as their board for experience, or their motherboard for everything that we are: love, hate, color, taste, smell, all these things that make us what we are. They're devoid of that. So I took my theoretical idea further, and I thought, well, if the Greys are clones and they've cloned themselves, and we are humans, and as I understand it, that we incarnate and reincarnate through an eternal cycle, through natural process of reproduction. If I was to clone you, Cameron, right now in a laboratory, let's say 100 times, you as the natural embodiment of creation, when you die, my belief is that your soul will transverse back to the other side, where you'll accumulate with your other memories and so forth. But the physical copies of you will grow, but they'll only have one memory of one life. No past, no future, no memory, just one. And my theory suggested that once those copies of you had physically died, that their spark of soul or consciousness, you want to call it, isn't strong enough to get back to where you have gone to. So these sparks of consciousness may have amalgamated themselves into one mind hive consciousness. And that one mind hive consciousness has found its way through to us and is interested in the process of reproduction. There's still a lot of work. I mean, I can't really explain this all in a few minutes to you, I'm afraid, because it takes a long time. But certainly I think that most of what we're dealing with could possibly be an indication of what could happen if we were to start cloning. I'm not talking about organs. I'm talking about humans. And of course, if you look at the brilliant Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was made into a film, Blade Runner, the androids were asking themselves the same question, the clones as they were. Is there a life after death? Do they go to where we go to? So this whole theory, or this download, I wrote out, and then I had it published in a magazine called, I think it was Alien Encounters or something, and they called it revolutionary with an speculation, but I wasn't happy. I wanted to try and add more to the model, which I have done through these other books I've written. And the one that came out last year is called, I did it through Amazon because I lost my other publishers, and I'm pleased to say that my brother and I have contracted for books by Philip Mantle's Flying Disc Press. So I'm working on another UFO book, and my brother that should be out late next year. But I brought out a book called A Passage Through Eternity, The Enigma of the Dead, UFOs and Aliens, where I try to, consider not just the alien question, but also the motives behind the alien agenda and us, because they're interested in us. And I was like, well, why are they interested in us? What is it about us that they're interested in? And if we go back to, we're from the future, why would we ourselves, my brother's quite rightly stated, why would we from the future come back and re-examine ourselves through the way that they do it? It doesn't make any sense. So, I'm not saying that those theories are wrong. We can't prove anything, but it's nice to be able to bring new ideas to the table, and certainly things that cannot be proven. And I'm a great believer in the Roswell UFO crash. I believe that physically happened. My brother is the same. And I believe that bodies had, been recovered. And I also believe that, that there is a conspiracy of silence, and it's still happening today in a very, very subtle way. So yeah, that's my take on the grays. It certainly encompasses a great deal of more questions than answers. You're absolutely correct, Cameron. We're not able to pinpoint it because it's so multi-complex and personal to the individual. And I also believe that perhaps on a soul level, this is happening as a contract with you and them, maybe on multiple levels beyond this dimensional reality. We just don't know.
If we do have a spiritual connection with them and a soul connection with them, are we able to contact them, and are they able to watch us spiritually?
Well, I'm not sure about watching us spiritually, but contact, yes. The experiment that we performed in Rendlesham Forest many years ago in the late 90s proved that point entirely. And myself, Ronald, my twin, and Susan, a good friend of ours, used to go to the forest. This is where I wrote Skybrush throughout time with the original British researcher into the Rendlesham UFO mystery, Brenda Butler. But we had performed an experiment, a psychic experiment, where we would, I called the chapter Calling Occupants in memory of the wonderful Karen Carpenter. And we'd spent an evening, sending our thoughts out to whoever that we wanted to see them. So a week later, we went to the forest and we set up camp, and we sat in the middle of the farmer's field. Yes, what a sight that was, under a beautiful moon and starlit sky. And we had an experience. We saw a triangular UFO with a gap and a circular undercarriage under it, and it was amazing. And this has been documented in Skybrush throughout time. That had been published in 2013 by Kettlebam Publishing Company here in England. So that proved that they, on a psychic level or a mental level, as it were, that, they are aware of you and your intentions. But contacting them, I don't know whether or not that's such a good idea. I always had dreams, after the sighting of the silver orb over our grandmother in the garden with the three of us, that we would communicate with these beautiful humans. But alas, it doesn't seem to be quite that way, does it?
So why do you feel that would be a bad idea to communicate with these beings?
I think that I will be heavily criticized because we have to be careful, because there are certain aspects of the UFO community who they deal with love and light. I'm not taking that away from them. But on a personal scientific level, I feel that we have to be very careful, because the experience I had in 1989 told me that I was not in control, that they were in control. That was a very frightening experience, and one I'm still trying to work out to this day. But there again, you'll have the other side of the community who deal with love and light, and they're here to save us. Well, that's all well and good, but we haven't seen much of that happening today. It's all been secret. With the real hard stuff, it's all been kept secret. And a lot of the phenomena that's been going on is very bizarre. We are in touch with another brilliant researcher, Paul Sinclair, and he's just released his new book, Truth Proof 3. And he's a researcher in Bempton, and a lot of strange phenomena happens out there. So, his take is that, some of it's not too good either. But I'm not one of these fear-mongering people who like to, say, oh, it's all terrible. I think if you take the human race, there is a good side and there's a bad side to us also.
It seems to me that the UFO phenomenon is a guarded secret. Are we afraid of disclosure, or why hasn't disclosure happened yet?
Well, I mean, you only have to talk about or mention the shortage of water, and everyone's out there buying every drop of water in the supermarkets. or petrol. If you say there's going to be a petrol shortage, you can't get petrol because everyone's queuing up. So I do believe that, an announcement that we are dealing with extraterrestrials, but by the way, it's something we don't yet understand and works upon very strange parallels, will frighten a great many people. And I know that most people are ready for that disclosure, especially those advocates who are pushing with research and for the truth. But we have to understand also that it will topple the religious establishments. It may destroy a lot of the belief systems of people here who will commit suicide, who won't be able to deal with it. So I believe that the powers that be are aware very much that this reality is true. They probably know a little bit more than we do, maybe a lot more. But I feel that most of the general public won't. And this is the problem, because since our inception, since birth, we've been programmed by a system which tells you what is right and what is wrong, what is truth and what is not. And when you start getting older, that conditioning, is programmed. So it's going to be hard for you to wake up and come out of that. It's only when you've had an experience that tells you otherwise. So we have to be very careful. I mean, I would be all for disclosure, most definitely, but I don't believe that's going to happen anytime soon. And I think the only time that will happen is if our guys turn up in huge UFOs like the wonderful Kenneth Johnson's V, or there's some catastrophe where we have to rebuild everything again. That's the only way that I could see it. I believe that that's not going to happen in some time yet. No.
Any theories about what disclosure would look like? Do you have any theories that how that would even be possible, how that would go down?
Well,
or how it could go down. I mean, it's that's a mystery there.
I think if we woke up in the morning and, like on V, and you pulled back the curtains and you saw these crafts over you, there's not a lot that we could do about it. And I think most of the general public would be in panic. But I think eventually we'd just, have to get on with it. With regards to disclosure coming through on a subtle level, no, I'm not so sure, because people will be saying, well, okay, President Trump, who doesn't believe anyway, but anyway, can you explain this? And they've got nothing to explain. They've got nothing physical to convince the public. That's going to be the problem. We know wonderfully that the Navy, and especially in your parts of the world, the USA, have reported the UFO activity, which my twin and I feel is absolutely wonderful, because that's a form of disclosure in itself. But it's not enough, because it still gets attacked by those who don't believe and those who are trying to maintain this secrecy, as it were. So it's a very complex question, but I personally myself don't, because the subject is so multi-complex, it really is hard for us to envision at the moment there is going to be any form of disclosure. But I do believe in the military. I have the greatest respect for the military themselves. I don't think they're all responsible for this. I think there's a group of people right at the top of the command chain that obviously make all the decisions. But I tell you something, I'd love to get in one of their hangars or whatever and see the stuff for myself physically. I'll do anything to get in there.
Yeah. What if a country like Brazil has a full outing of the alien UFO phenomenon in the next month? Is that enough? Or do developed countries in the West have to jump on board for this to be taken seriously by skeptics?
Yeah, I believe there's a divide of opinion. Now, Mexico has been of interest, and I believe there was a lot of sightings back in the 90s, weren't there, as well, which of UFO activity. And I believe that it's some type of awakening. To some degree, it seems beautiful, but I believe that other countries are. It could also be the level of, the level of belief within those areas. And I believe that if more people open up to it, then maybe more people will see this phenomena for what it is. But I think we've got a long way in understanding who they are, what they want, where they come from. But because as humans, we're never very trusting, you see. It's always about what do they want? What are they after? And I think, to be honest with you, if humans had their way and we did integrate with them, there'd be some who'd want more from them and then end up destroying them. So I feel that it's not the right time.
You are an identical twin. Is this a shared spiritual gift with you and your brother? And do you think identical twins would be of interest to extraterrestrials?
Well, my identical twin had an experience some years before I did. I don't consider us to be special in any way, but I do believe that my twin, he's very creative. He's starting to develop a psychic ability, but it's not as strong as the one that I'm currently using at the moment. But I don't mean that in an egotistical way. I'm just saying that this is the way it is. But the medium that read for me, read for Ronnie, also said this to him, that it would start to develop in his late 40s. We're now 50. But he's very creative, and he's written quite a lot of books. He's just finished one called The Archons, which is due out from Lulu soon. And he I think he channels it. I think, when people say channel, it kind of puts you in that little box, doesn't it? Like, oh, he's crazy. But what I mean by channeling is that we're all inspired, and I believe through inspiration this can heighten consciousness, and consciousness is able to connect with these wonderful ideas. And people say, well, it's just imagination. I don't believe that. I believe that it's coming from the pool of creation itself, that everything around us has been created from an idea that sprung up from, we think, nowhere. But everything imagined has been realized somewhere else. That's my understanding of consciousness and how it works. But yeah, he's very creative.
Tell me about your book, Reaching for the Divine.
Reaching for the Divine was a book that I wrote many years ago that Keppel Ban brought out. And it's basically a manual that's a no-nonsense manual about communicating with people who've crossed over or trying to, understanding the principles, the governing principles behind communication, and also trying to work out, the big question of life after death. So I wanted to write a book that wasn't all about some mediums have written books or how great they are and how wonderful, and addressing that we do have problems, that trying to understand this kind of communication can be difficult. So I wanted to write a no-nonsense book, and I am actually halfway through a new psychic book called Guardians of the Dead that I hope to have out late next year after I finish the UFO book in December.
And you also have a book called Sky Crash Throughout Time. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, Sky Crash Throughout Time was based around Brenda Butler, who was the original investigator into the Rendlesham UFO mystery. My twin and I are meeting with Colonel Charles Holt, who had been the base commander at the time. I'm sure you remember the 1980s UFO event, the most famous one here in Suffolk, England. So we wanted to write a book based on her experiences, Brenda Butler's experiences, and also the UFO seen before and after, because everyone just assumes that was the main one big event. But contrary to belief, like Paul Sinclair's work, there are areas of certain key locations where this phenomena seems to become stronger. He's not sure why that is, Paul Sinclair, but it's certainly something that may answer a few more questions. So that was Sky Crash. And I wrote Believe as well, Believe, Bridging the Gap Between the Psychic and UFO Phenomena, which dealt with the theory of the psychic and UFO link, because the medium I'd seen in my late 20s told me that I'll be bridging the gap between the psychic and UFO phenomena, and I didn't understand what she was talking about. Have I bridged it? No, I don't think I have. I may have made a little bit of progress in a little bit of it, but most people won't accept that, because a lot of people who deal with ufology want the nuts and bolts aspect of it, and certainly don't want to consider the other hypothesis. But we have to look into all areas. That's my belief.
So you're a busy guy, you're a prolific author. What do you have coming up in the future that we can look forward to?
Well, I have a new book called You, the Public Deceived, The Grandeur of a Deception, that my publisher, Philip Mantle, is bringing out. And my brother's working on a UFO book also that's coming out by the same company. And also my brother and I have been endorsed by David Saperstein, who was the author of Cocoon, one of our sci-fi novels that we wrote called The Ungodly Agenda. David is a great guy. He wrote Cocoon. He's written quite a lot of books, and he's been our mentor from this state. So he's a great guy also. I want to work on, more exploration of the psychic realm, and also, so I think I'll be spending my days writing books on UFOs, and, hopefully trying to work out old cases and new cases, and trying to bring a little bit to the table. If it's a little bit that can help, then I'll be happy with that. I really will.
You're very easy to find on Facebook, and people can look for you there. But however, I do know your website, and I've looked through your website. It's a beautiful website, a brilliant website, and you don't see that often. So tell people where they find your website and what they can find on your website.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's www.philipkinsella.com. And my brother has one as well. It's filled with his art. And incidentally, they used a piece of his art on one of the UFO programs. He's very proud of that. So they can look at both of our sites if they wanted. But, in essence, we're all important. The message is that we're all connected, that we're all linked. No one's better than anyone else. We're all seeking our own answers to those questions that present themselves to us. And sometimes I wish that I could live the normal life, but I guess that would be too boring. So I'm up for the challenge, and I'm really happy with exploring these territories where some people say that it doesn't exist, and I'm like, no, it does exist. So that's incredible, and I'm really grateful to all the people that have supported us both in our work and our dreams as well.
Philip Kinsella has been my guest. Sir, thank you so much for being on the show, and I'd like to give you the final word today. Thank you.
Okay, so the final word is thank you, Cameron, for having me on the show, and to all the listeners, believe in yourself and believe that we are not alone.
Thank you, sir.
That's okay. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.